War has always exacted a price far beyond the visible battlefield. Throughout human history, conflict has left scars that extend far deeper than physical wounds, penetrating the very essence of human psychological experience. The true cost of war is not measured in territorial gains or strategic victories, but in the profound mental and emotional devastation experienced by those who witness and participate in its brutal reality. The trenches of World War I represented a pivotal moment in understanding human psychological resilience. Unprecedented industrial warfare created conditions of psychological terror never before experienced in human conflict. Soldiers were subjected to prolonged periods of extreme stress, constant bombardment, and an almost surreal landscape of mud, blood, and constant death. The Western Front, stretching across France and Belgium, became a crucible of human psychological endurance. Medical professionals of the time were entirely unprepared for the mental breakdown they witnessed. Young men would arrive at medical stations exhibiting bizarre symptoms: uncontrollable shaking, sudden paralysis, muteness, and extreme emotional instability. Initially, military leadership viewed these conditions as a form of moral weakness or cowardice. Some commanders believed soldiers were simply attempting to escape military service, while others saw these symptoms as a sign of individual psychological fragility. The term shell shock emerged during this period, originally believed to be a physical condition caused by the concussive force of artillery bombardments. Doctors hypothesized that the intense vibrations from explosions might be causing microscopic brain damage. As research progressed, it became clear that the condition was far more complex, rooted in psychological trauma rather than physical injury. World War II brought a more nuanced approach to understanding psychological trauma. The global scale of the conflict, involving millions of soldiers across multiple theaters of war, demanded a more sophisticated medical response. Military psychologists began to recognize that combat exposure created predictable patterns of psychological distress. The concept of combat fatigue replaced the earlier terminology of shell shock, reflecting a growing understanding that prolonged exposure to extreme stress could break down. The scientific understanding of psychological trauma underwent a revolutionary transformation during this period. Pioneers in psychology and psychiatry, such as Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and later researchers like Abram Kardiner, began to develop comprehensive frameworks for understanding human psychological responses to extreme stress. These early researchers recognized that trauma was not just about individual psychological makeup, but represented a complex interaction between personal resilience, environmental stressors, and neurological responses. They started to map out how extreme experiences could fundamentally alter an individual's perception of safety, trust, and personal agency. Advancements in medical imaging and neurological research during the latter half of the 20th century provided unprecedented insights into how psychological trauma physically transforms the brain. Researchers discovered that prolonged exposure to extreme stress could actually modify neural pathways, creating permanent changes in how the brain processes information and responds to potential threats. Brain scans revealed that individuals suffering from what would later be termed post-traumatic stress disorder experienced measurable differences in amygdala function, hippocampus volume, and stress hormone regulation. These were not imaginary symptoms, but documented physiological changes resulting from extreme psychological stress. The Vietnam War became a critical turning point in recognizing psychological trauma as a legitimate medical condition. Returning veterans, many of whom struggled to reintegrate into civilian life, began to advocate for a more comprehensive understanding of their experiences. Their persistent efforts, combined with the work of progressive psychiatric researchers, led to the official recognition of post-traumatic stress disorder in 1980. This recognition was more than a medical classification. It represented a profound cultural shift in understanding human psychological resilience. It acknowledged that psychological injury could be as debilitating as physical wounds and required comprehensive, compassionate treatment. The psychological impacts of war extend far beyond the immediate combat experience. Soldiers who experience extreme trauma often struggle with complex, long-lasting effects that permeate every aspect of their lives. These can include persistent nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, difficulty maintaining intimate relationships, increased risk of depression and substance abuse, and a fundamental alteration of their worldview. Family members and loved ones also bear significant psychological burdens. Secondary trauma, where family members experience emotional distress from witnessing a loved one's psychological struggle, has become an important area of psychological research. Contemporary psychological treatment for war-related trauma represents the culmination of over a century of research and understanding. Modern approaches are holistic, integrating multiple treatment modalities: cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, medication management, body-based interventions like EMDR, and community support networks all play crucial roles in helping individuals process and heal from psychological trauma. As we continue to understand the profound psychological impacts of warfare, we move closer to recognizing the full human cost of conflict. The story of war is not just a narrative of battles and strategic maneuvers, but a deeply human tale of survival, resilience, and the incredible capacity of the human mind to endure and ultimately heal. The invisible wounds of war remind us that true courage is not just about facing external threats, but about confronting and overcoming the internal battles that rage long after the guns have fallen silent.